The security guard arrived within 2 minutes, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s named Marcus Webb, whose name tag also bore a small American flag pin. He approached with the weary expression of someone who'd handled this situation 100 times before. Confused elderly people wandering the Capitol, tourists who'd gotten separated from their groups, protesters who'd somehow slipped past the checkpoints. "Ma'am," Marcus said gently, his hand hovering near Alina's elbow but not quite touching, "I'm going to need you to come with me." Alina didn't move. She kept her eyes locked on Ashley, the receptionist, who was now typing frantically on her computer, probably documenting this interaction to cover herself. "I have an appointment," Alina repeated, her voice still level but with an edge of steel that made Marcus hesitate. "My name is Dr. Alina Martinez. I'm scheduled to meet with Senator Harrison at 2 p.m. regarding safety violations at Thornton Aerospace. Check your system." Ashley barely glanced up. "There's no appointment under that name." "Then check under Martinez, check under Air Force, check under whistleblower case 2019-447. Alina's accent grew thicker as her frustration mounted. "I have confirmation emails. I have." "Ma'am, you're causing a disruption," Marcus interrupted, his tone still patient but firmer now. "If you have an appointment, we can sort this out downstairs in the security office. But you can't stay here." 2 more aides had stopped in the corridor now, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. One of them, a young man with styled hair and an expensive watch, nudged his companion. $10 says she's here to talk about chemtrails or alien cover-ups," he whispered, but loud enough for Alina to hear. His friend laughed. "Nah, probably thinks the government stole her social security check." Alina's jaw clenched, but she maintained her composure. She'd spent 28 years in the military, where maintaining composure under pressure wasn't just preferred, it was survival. She'd had male pilots tell her women couldn't handle the G-forces. She'd had mechanics sabotage her aircraft to prove she didn't belong. She'd had commanding officers question her calculations even when she was provably correct. This was just more of the same. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly, shifting her weight slightly so she was more firmly planted. "Not until I deliver this information to someone who will listen." Ashley stood up now, her patience exhausted. "Look, lady, I don't know how you got past security downstairs, but Senator Harrison is an extremely busy woman. She meets with defense secretaries, NASA administrators, joint chiefs of staff. She does not meet with random walk-ins who think they have some conspiracy theory to share." "This isn't a conspiracy theory," Alina said, her voice rising slightly despite her best efforts. "This is documented evidence of contract fraud that puts lives at risk. 8 astronauts are currently on the International Space Station and the life support systems." "Sure, and I'm sure you know all about life support systems," Ashley interrupted, her tone dripping with condescension. "Did you learn that on the internet, from YouTube videos?" Something flickered in Alina's eyes, a flash of anger so intense that Marcus actually took a step back. But when she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. "I learned it from designing them. I learned it from 30 years of calculating orbital mechanics and atmospheric recycling systems. I learned it from analyzing every failure mode, every redundancy, every possible scenario where something could go wrong and astronauts could die. I learned it from watching men present my work as their own, over and over, because people like you decided I couldn't possibly know what I was talking about." The corridor had gone quiet. Even the mocking aides had stopped smirking. Ashley's face flushed red. "I don't have to listen to this. Marcus, remove her now." Marcus looked uncomfortable, caught between his duty and something in Alina's bearing that suggested this wasn't a typical situation. "Ma'am, I really don't want to have to physically escort you out, but—" "Then don't," Alina said simply. "Just call James Norton. He's an aide here. He's the one who scheduled this meeting. Call him, please." "There is no James Norton on our staff," Ashley said triumphantly, checking her computer. See, you don't even have the right office. You're in the wrong place talking about the wrong people and… Ashley, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and authoritative. What the hell is going on out here? A woman in her 40s emerged from one of the side offices, Senator Harrison's chief of staff, Margaret Chen. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, but she radiated the kind of authority that came from managing one of the most powerful offices in Congress. Ashley's confidence wavered. Ms. Chen, this woman doesn't have an appointment and refuses to leave. She's claiming to meet with the senator about some aerospace thing, but… Some aerospace thing, Margaret's eyes narrowed. She looked at Alina, really looked at her in a way no one else had. Dr. Martinez. Alina felt something loosen in her chest. Yes, I'm Dr. Martinez. Margaret's expression shifted from annoyance to fury in an instant, but the fury wasn't directed at Alina. Ashley, did you not check the senator's private calendar? The one that includes sensitive meetings that aren't listed on the public schedule. Ashley went pale. The private calendar is password protected. I don't have. Because you're a junior receptionist who's been here for 3 months, Margaret's voice could have cut glass, which is exactly why you're supposed to check with senior staff before you turn people away. She turned to Marcus. Stand down, Marcus. Dr. Martinez is exactly where she's supposed to be. Marcus stepped back immediately, looking relieved. Margaret approached Alina, extending her hand. Dr. Martinez, I'm Margaret Chen, Senator Harrison's chief of staff. I apologize profusely for this disaster. James Norton is one of our senior policy advisors. He works primarily on defense and aerospace issues, which is why he's not on the general staff directory. He's been working on your case file for weeks. Alina shook her hand, feeling the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright start to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Thank you. I was beginning to think that you'd been dismissed again, ignored again. Margaret's voice was gentle now. I read your file, Dr. Martinez. I know what you've been through to get here, and I'm sorry that your arrival was met with such disrespect. She turned back to Ashley, whose face had gone from red to white. Ashley, you will apologize to Dr. Martinez, and then you will spend the rest of your day reflecting on what just happened here. We'll discuss your continued employment later. Ms. Chen, I didn't know. Ashley's voice was shaking now, all her earlier condescension replaced with fear. You didn't ask, Margaret corrected. You saw an elderly woman in an old blazer carrying a manila folder, and you made assumptions. Those assumptions nearly cost us the most important whistleblower testimony this committee has seen in a decade. She paused. Apologize, now. Ashley turned to Alina, tears welling in her eyes. Dr. Martinez, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have. It's all right, Alina said quietly, though they both knew it wasn't. You're young, you'll learn. Margaret gestured toward the senator's office suite. Dr. Martinez, please come with me. The senator is in a committee meeting that should end in about 10 minutes. Can I get you anything while you wait? Coffee, water, a moment to collect yourself. As Alina followed Margaret down the corridor, she heard one of the aides who'd been mocking her whisper to his friend. Did she say Dr. Martinez and whistleblower testimony? Dude, I think we just watched someone make a career-ending mistake, his friend whispered back. Margaret led Alina into a comfortable waiting area, nothing like the public reception desk. This room had leather chairs, fresh flowers, and walls lined with photographs of Senator Harrison with various dignitaries and military personnel. Please sit, Margaret said, gesturing to a chair. James will be here in just a moment. He's been following your case closely. He thinks you might save lives with what you know. Alina sank into the chair, still clutching her manila folder. Her hands were shaking slightly now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. Dr. Martinez, Margaret said gently, may I ask you something personal? Alina nodded. Why didn't you fight back harder? Just now, I mean. You could have told Ashley exactly who you were, shown her credentials, demanded to speak with someone in charge, but you just stood there and took it. Alina was quiet for a moment, her thumb unconsciously rubbing the silver bracelet at her wrist. Because I've learned that demanding respect rarely works. Either people see your worth or they don't. And if they don't, she shrugged, fighting them just wastes energy I need for the battles that matter. Margaret studied her with new respect. You're a lot stronger than I would have been. No, Alina said softly, just a lot more tired. The door opened, and a young man in his early 30s rushed in, James Norton, his tie slightly askew, his face flushed from hurrying. When he saw Alina, his expression transformed from worry to relief. Dr. Martinez, thank God. I heard there was an incident at reception and I was afraid. He stopped, taking in her worn appearance, her tired eyes. Are you all right? Alina managed a small smile. I'm here, that's what matters. James knelt beside her chair, his expression earnest. I'm so sorry. I should have met you downstairs. I should have made sure everyone knew you were coming. It's done, Alina interrupted gently. Let's focus on why I'm here. James nodded, standing. The senator is wrapping up her meeting now. She's cleared the rest of her afternoon to review your evidence. He paused. Dr. Martinez, I want you to know I believe you. I've read everything you sent. The data is solid, and after today, after we present this to the senator, things are going to change. Alina looked down at her crinkled manila folder, containing 127 pages that represented 4 years of her life, the last of her savings, and perhaps the last chance to keep her promise to Miguel. I hope you're right, she whispered. Because if he wasn't, if she'd come all this way, endured all this humiliation and still no one listened, she didn't know what she'd do. The door to Senator Harrison's private office opened. Send her in, came a woman's voice. James offered Alina his arm. Ready. Alina stood, straightened her blazer and clutched her folder tight. Ready, she said. And together, they walked toward what she desperately hoped would finally be justice. The library book was 3 weeks overdue, and Alina knew Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, would give her that disappointed look again. But she couldn't return it, not yet. She'd read Principles of Aeronautics 7 times, and each time she understood more. The equations were like poetry to her, describing the invisible forces that let metal birds defy gravity. Alina Reyes, you come down from that roof this instant. Her father's voice was sharper now, cutting through the warm evening air. Alina sighed, carefully marking her page with a dried flower, a Mexican primrose her mother had pressed, and climbed down the ladder her father had built when she was 10 and had first discovered the flat roof's potential as an observatory. Inside, the house smelled like her mother's puzzle, simmering on the stove since morning. Her father sat at the kitchen table, his weathered hands wrapped around a beer bottle, his construction worker's tan stopping abruptly at his collar and wrists. Miguel sat across from him, 17, and already looking like a man, his high school diploma framed on the wall behind him. Your teacher called today, her father said, not looking at Alina as she slid into a chair. Mrs. Morrison. Alina's heart sank. Mrs. Morrison was her math teacher, and while the woman clearly loved Alina's aptitude for numbers, she also had opinions about appropriate ambitions for young ladies. She says you told the class you want to be an astronaut. Her father's voice was carefully neutral, which was somehow worse than anger. I do want to be an astronaut, Alina said, lifting her chin. Or a pilot, or an aerospace engineer, anything that involves flying. Miguel caught her eye and gave her a tiny shake of his head. Don't push it. But Alina was 14 and full of the kind of stubborn conviction that comes from knowing, with absolute certainty, what you're meant to do with your life. Mija, her father said, finally looking at her, and his eyes were sad in a way that made her chest ache. I love that you're smart. I'm proud that you're smart. But you need to understand, people like us, we don't become astronauts. Why not? Because we're Mexican, her father said bluntly. Because we're poor. Because the world doesn't work that way. It could work that way, Alina insisted. President Kennedy said. President Kennedy is dead, her father interrupted, his voice harder now. And even when he was alive, when he talked about putting a man on the moon, he meant a man, not a girl. Not a Mexican girl from El Paso whose father pours concrete and whose mother cleans toilets. The words stung, probably because they were true. Alina had watched the news coverage of the Gemini missions. All the astronauts were men. All of them were white. Most came from military families, had college educations, spoke with confident voices that expected to be heard. None of them looked like her. Things are changing, Alina said, but her voice was smaller now. They have to change. Maybe they will, her mother said from the stove, surprising them all. She usually stayed out of these arguments. But change takes time, Elenita, and in the meantime you need something practical, something that will put food on your table. I could be a teacher, Alina offered, trying to find middle ground. A math teacher. Mrs. Morrison says I could get a scholarship to the state university. Her father's expression softened slightly. A teacher, that's good, that's respectable, you could have a good life as a teacher. But Alina felt something shrivel inside her at the thought of spending her life in a classroom, teaching equations instead of using them to touch the stars. Miguel spoke up for the first time. What if she did both? They all turned to look at him. What if Alina studied to be a teacher? That makes Dad happy, gives her something practical, but she also takes engineering classes, learns everything she can about aeronautics. Miguel leaned forward, his face earnest. That way, if things do change, if doors do open, she'll be ready. And if they don't, she still has teaching to fall back on. Alina's father considered this, taking a long pull from his beer. Engineering classes cost money. I'll help, Miguel said immediately. I'm working at the garage full-time now, and I've been thinking. He paused, glancing at his mother, who'd gone very still at the stove. I've been thinking about enlisting. The recruiter says the Army will pay for college afterward. GI Bill, I could do 4 years, save my salary, and help Alina with school. No, their mother's voice was sharp, final. No, Miguel, we didn't cross the border so our children could die in someone else's war. Mama, we didn't cross the border, Miguel said gently. We were born here. This is our country too. And it's not someone else's war if we're the ones fighting it. Vietnam has nothing to do with us, their mother insisted, turning from the stove, wooden spoon still in her hand. Nothing to do with our family. It has everything to do with us if it means Alina can go to college, Miguel argued. If it means she has a chance at something better. Alina watched the argument unfold, feeling sick. She didn't want Miguel to enlist. She didn't want him to sacrifice his future for hers. But she also knew that stubborn set to his jaw, he'd already made up his mind. Their father was silent, staring into his beer bottle as if it held answers. We'll talk about this later, their mother said finally, her voice shaking. Alina, set the table. Miguel, go wash up. Your father and I need to discuss this privately. That night, Alina couldn't sleep. She lay in the small room she shared with her younger sister Maria, listening to the murmur of her parents' voices through the thin walls. She couldn't make out words, but she could hear the emotion, her mother's fear, her father's weary resignation. She slipped out of bed and climbed back onto the roof. The stars were brilliant tonight, sharp and clear in the desert air. She found Polaris, then traced the constellations her abuela had taught her, not the Greek ones from school, but the Mexican ones, the stories her ancestors had told. I don't want Miguel to go to war, she whispered to the darkness, but I do want to fly. Was she selfish for wanting both, for wanting her dreams and her brother's safety? Talking to the stars again. Alina jumped. Miguel had climbed up behind her, moving quietly in his worn sneakers. You scared me, she said. Sorry. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching in the companionable way of siblings who'd grown up in close quarters. Look, about what I said downstairs. You don't have to enlist because of me, Alina said quickly. I'll find another way, loans or work study or… It's not just because of you, Miguel interrupted. Though that's part of it, but Alina, I've been thinking about this for months. The guys at the garage, they talk about the war like it's an adventure, like it's a chance to prove something, to be part of something bigger than themselves. He paused. And the truth is, I'm not like you. I'm not brilliant. I barely passed high school. The best job I'll ever get in this town is fixing cars or pouring concrete like Dad. But if I enlist, if I serve… You could die, Alina said bluntly. I could also come home a hero, Miguel countered. Come home with money saved, with the GI Bill, with options I'll never have otherwise. And yeah, maybe I'm being naive. Maybe it's all propaganda and the reality is different. But what's the alternative? Stay here. Work at the garage until my back gives out like Dad's. Alina wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She'd seen the way her father moved in the mornings, the way he winced when he thought no one was looking. Construction work was destroying his body, and he was only 42. Besides, Miguel continued, his voice softer now, someone has to make sure you get to the stars, little sister. Mom and Dad, they love us, but they don't understand what it's like to want something more, to look at the sky and feel like you're supposed to be up there. He bumped her shoulder. But I get it, and I want to see you make it, even if I have to push you there myself. What if I can't? Alina's voice was small. What if Dad's right? What if people like us just don't become astronauts? Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Then he pointed at the sky. You see that star, the bright one near the horizon? That's not a star, it's Venus. Okay, smartass, you see Venus. Alina smiled despite herself. Yes. When the Spanish came to Mexico, the priests told our ancestors that their gods were false, that they'd been praying to the wrong things. But our ancestors had been watching Venus for thousands of years. They'd mapped its movements, predicted its cycles, built pyramids aligned to its path. They knew the heavens better than the conquistadors ever would. Miguel turned to look at her. My point is, Alina, our people have always looked at the stars. We've always known they meant something. So maybe we don't have astronauts who look like us yet, but that doesn't mean we never will. You really think I could do it? Alina whispered. I think you're the smartest person I've ever met. I think you understand math that makes my brain hurt. I think you have this fire in you that won't go out no matter how many people tell you it should. Miguel grabbed her hand. Yeah, Alina, I really think you could do it. I think you're going to do it. Tears pricked her eyes. Promise me you'll come back. If you enlist, promise me you'll come back safe. Miguel pulled her into a hug. I promise I'll try, Hermanita. I promise I'll try. But promises, Alina would learn, were fragile things, especially when made to stars that were too far away to hear. El Paso, Texas, 1967, 2 years later. Miguel enlisted on his 18th birthday. Their mother cried for 3 days straight. Their father said nothing, just shook Miguel's hand with a grip that left marks. Alina was 16 now, a junior in high school, taking every advanced math and science class available. Mrs. Morrison had connected her with Professor Whitmore at UT El Paso, and he'd started giving her college-level textbooks, telling her mother she was too bright to waste. The night before Miguel shipped out to basic training, Alina gave him something. It was a small notebook, the kind with graph paper inside, and on the first page she'd written out an equation, the trajectory calculation for a rocket reaching escape velocity. What's this? Miguel asked, flipping through the empty pages. It's for your thoughts, Alina said. When you're over there, wherever they send you, write things down, observations, questions, anything you wonder about, and when you come home, we'll figure out the answers together. Miguel looked at the equation, at his sister's careful handwriting. You really think I'll understand any of this? You're smarter than you think, Alina said. You just need someone to believe in you the way you believe in me. Miguel left the next morning on a Greyhound bus, wearing civilian clothes but carrying a duffel bag with his recruitment papers inside. The whole family went to the station: mother, father, Elena, and little Maria, who was 9 and didn't quite understand why everyone was crying. As the bus pulled away, Miguel pressed his hand against the window. Elena pressed hers against the air, matching his gesture. She never saw him alive again. But she kept her promise to the stars. She studied. She excelled. She graduated valedictorian of her high school class in 1969, the same year Apollo 11 landed on the moon. She watched Neil Armstrong take that first step while sitting in her living room, her mother beside her, both of them thinking of Miguel, who'd been in Vietnam for 6 months and hadn't written in 3 weeks. "One small step for man," Armstrong said. Elena whispered the rest to herself. One giant leap for mankind. She would make it a leap for all humankind, she decided, including Mexican girls from El Paso whose brothers died believing in them. She would fly high enough for both of them. Even if it killed her trying. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony had been on a Tuesday. By Friday, someone had taped a cartoon to Elena's locker, a drawing of an old woman in a walker with pilot wings captioned, "Abuela's next mission, the retirement home." Elena stared at it for a long moment, then carefully took it down, folded it, and put it in her pocket. She'd learned not to react. Reactions gave them power. "Hey, Martinez," Captain Rick Holloway called across the hangar. He was 26, cocky, and had washed out of 2 test flights that Elena had successfully completed. "Heard you're getting interviewed for that Aviation Week article. Make sure you mention how you needed Drake to talk you through the landing procedure." Elena turned slowly. "Drake told me to eject and abandon an $18 million aircraft. I ignored him and saved it. That's in the official report, which you'd know if you could read past a 3rd grade level." Several pilots laughed. Holloway's face went red. "You got lucky once," he spat. "One day your luck's gonna run out and you're gonna get yourself killed, or worse, get one of us killed." "Then I suggest you avoid flying with me," Elena said calmly, pulling on her flight jacket. "I'd hate for your inevitable crash to be blamed on the woman in the cockpit." She walked past him, her heart pounding but her face expressionless. She'd perfected that mask over the years, the ability to absorb insults and keep moving forward. But some nights, alone in her quarters, the mask slipped. Some nights she wondered if they were right, if she was being selfish, forcing her way into a world that didn't want her, if her presence was making things harder for everyone else. Those were the nights she took out Miguel's Purple Heart and her own Distinguished Flying Cross and laid them side by side on her desk. "We earned these," she reminded herself. "We belong here." Edwards Air Force Base, Officers Club, 1988. Elena rarely attended social events, but Colonel Reeves had specifically asked her to come to this one, a celebration for the successful completion of the latest test program. She stood near the bar, nursing a beer she didn't really want, watching the younger pilots swap stories and flirt with the few women present, secretaries and nurses mostly, brought as dates. "You should be celebrating." The voice belonged to David Chen, a fellow test pilot who'd been respectful from the start, one of the few. He was Chinese-American, had served 2 tours as a Navy fighter pilot before transferring to the Air Force, and understood what it meant to be the only in a room. "I am celebrating," Elena said, raising her beer slightly, quietly. David smiled. "Mind if I celebrate quietly with you?" They talked for hours that night, about flying, about the casual racism and sexism they both navigated, about what kept them going when everything felt impossible. David had grown up in San Francisco, the son of immigrants who'd survived the Chinese Exclusion Act era. His father had been interned during World War II, despite being born in California. "My dad told me something once," David said, swirling his drink. "He said the most radical thing we can do is succeed, Not in spite of them, but because we deserve to. Because we're good enough. Because it's our right. Alina felt something shift in her chest. Your father sounds wise. He died last year. David's voice caught slightly. Heart attack. He never got to see me make test pilot. That's what I think about when guys like Holloway try to break me down. I think about my dad and how he'd tell me to prove them wrong by being undeniable. Undeniable, Alina repeated softly. I like that. They started spending more time together. David was careful, respectful. He knew the regulations about fraternization, knew how any relationship would be scrutinized 10 times harder because she was a woman. But slowly, carefully, something grew between them. In 1989, after a year of late-night conversations and stolen moments in the hangar, David asked her to marry him. Alina said yes. Edwards Air Force Base, 1990. The marriage lasted 3 years. It wasn't David's fault, or even Alina's. It was the impossible mathematics of two ambitious people trying to build a life in a system designed to keep them separate. When David got orders to transfer to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, Alina had just been promoted to full colonel and assigned to lead a critical research program at Edwards. Come with me, David said, though they both knew it was impossible. You know I can't leave this project, Alina said, her heart breaking. 2 more years and we could revolutionize how we approach. There's always another project, Alina. There's always another program, another test, another proof you need to give them. David's voice was tired, not angry. When does it end? When do we get to just live? When they stop questioning whether we belong, Alina said quietly. They'll never stop questioning, not really. We could be perfect for 100 years and they'd still find reasons to doubt us. David took her hands. I'm not saying give up your career. I'm saying choose us for once. Choose something other than proving them wrong. But Alina couldn't. She'd made promises, to Miguel, to herself, to every woman who'd come after her. Walking away from her command, following her husband like a dutiful military wife, felt like betraying everything she'd fought for. They divorced in 1992. It was amicable, sad, full of the kind of love that wasn't enough to overcome the realities of their lives. I hope you find what you're looking for, David said at the courthouse, signing the papers. I hope you do too, Alina replied and meant it. She went back to Edwards alone. She was 40 years old, divorced, and more committed than ever to her work. If she couldn't have a normal life, couldn't have love and partnership and the things other people seemed to manage, then she'd pour everything into the mission. She'd make the sacrifice mean something. Edwards Air Force Base, 1995. At 43, Alina had become something of an institution. The nickname Abuela had evolved. It was still used, but now with a mixture of respect and affection. The younger pilots knew her reputation: impossible standards, meticulous attention to detail, and the ability to outfly most of them despite being decades older. Lieutenant Jessica Wu, one of the first Asian American women to join the test pilot program, sought Alina out her first week. Colonel Martinez, I wanted to introduce myself and thank you. Alina looked up from her calculations. For what? For being here, for making it possible for people like me to be here. Jessica's eyes were bright with determination. My recruiter told me I'd never make it as a pilot. Too small, he said. Too female. Too Chinese. But then I read about you, about the F-16 landing, and I thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too. Alina felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was why she'd stayed. Not for recognition or glory, but for this, for making it easier for the women who came after. The first year will be hell, Alina told Jessica honestly. They'll question everything. Your ability, your judgment, your right to be here. They'll give you the most dangerous test flights and hope you fail. They'll mock you when you succeed and blame you when anything goes wrong. Jessica's smile didn't waver. I know, but I also know that you survived it, and if you survived it, I can too. You'll do more than survive, Alina said. You'll excel. And one day, another young woman will look at you the way you're looking at me and you'll tell her the same thing. It gets easier. Not because they change, but because we do. We get stronger. We get undeniable. Over the next decade, Alina mentored dozens of young pilots, men and women, people of all backgrounds who saw in her proof that excellence could overcome prejudice. She didn't just teach them how to fly, she taught them how to endure. But there was a cost. The long hours, the constant vigilance, the emotional armor she wore every day, it all added up. She had no partner, few friends outside work, no children. Her life was her career, and her career was everything. Some nights she wondered if it had been worth it. Then she'd see Lieutenant Wu execute a perfect test flight, or read about another barrier broken, another door opened, and she'd know. Yes, it had been worth it. Every sacrifice, every insult endured, every lonely night, it had been worth it to pave the road for others. Even if no one but her would ever know the true cost. Edwards Air Force Base, 1996. On Alina's 44th birthday, Colonel Reeves called her into his office. Martinez, how would you feel about a transfer? NASA's Johnson Space Center is looking for someone with your expertise for their Life Support Systems program. Alina's heart leaped. NASA, the dream she'd had since she was 14, sitting on a roof in El Paso counting stars. When? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Couple of years. They want you to finish the current test program first, then transition. Reeves smiled. This is big, Alina. This is your chance to work on the space program, to actually touch the stars you've been reaching for. That night, Alina climbed onto the roof of the officers' quarters, against regulations, but she didn't care, and looked up at the night sky over the Mojave Desert. The stars looked the same as they had in El Paso 30 years ago. Distant, beautiful, impossible. But not quite as impossible as they'd once seemed. I'm coming, Miguel, she whispered. I'm finally coming. She didn't know then that NASA would bring its own battles, its own disappointments, its own moments where she'd question everything. But that night, looking at the stars, she let herself hope. And hope, she'd learned, was its own kind of courage. Alina's office was a windowless cube in the basement of the Pentagon, chosen specifically because the work was classified and required isolation from regular foot traffic. She'd been working 18-hour days, surviving on vending machine coffee and the sandwiches she packed from her cramped apartment in Arlington. The walls were covered with charts, red pins marking aircraft losses, blue pins marking near misses, yellow pins marking mechanical failures. Strings connected them, forming a web of causation that only Alina could fully see. It looked like something from a conspiracy theorist's basement, but every connection was backed by data, every theory tested against hard numbers. She was running a simulation on her computer, the fifth iteration of a new protocol that would reduce pilot exposure during reconnaissance missions, when Colonel Hendricks walked in without knocking. Martinez, we need to talk about your presentation to the Joint Chiefs. Alina saved her work and turned. What about it? It's not happening. Hendricks sat on the edge of her desk, his posture too casual, too familiar. I'm presenting the findings instead. Alina's hands stilled on the keyboard. Sir, with respect, this is my research. I've spent 6 months. Which is exactly why I need to present it, Hendricks interrupted. Alina, be realistic. You walk into a room full of 4-star generals, men who have been in the military since before you were born, and tell them they've been doing things wrong. They're not going to hear you. They're going to see a female colonel, probably assume you got your rank through affirmative action, and dismiss everything you say. Then they'd be wrong, Alina said flatly. Of course they'd be wrong. Your research is brilliant. It could save hundreds of lives, but that's exactly my point. It's too important to let your pride get in the way. Hendricks leaned forward. I present this, they listen, the protocols get implemented and lives get saved. Isn't that what matters? Alina wanted to argue that it wasn't pride, it was principle. That every time she let someone else take credit, she was reinforcing the system that said women couldn't be experts, couldn't be trusted, couldn't be the authorities on their own work. But she thought about the pilots. Boys Miguel's age, flying missions over Iraq, trusting their equipment and their training. If her protocols could bring them home safe, did it really matter whose name was on the presentation? "I want full attribution in the written report," she said finally, "and I want to be in the room when you present." "Done," Hendricks agreed immediately, standing. "You'll sit right behind me. Anyone asks technical questions, I'll defer to you. Deal?" It wasn't a deal. It was a surrender, but Alina nodded anyway. The presentation went exactly as Hendricks predicted. The generals listened to him, asked questions that Alina answered from her seat in the back, and approved the protocol changes. The implementation began within a month. By the end of the year, aircraft casualties had dropped by 37%. Alina's protocol had saved an estimated 43 lives. Colonel Hendricks received a Legion of Merit. His citation specifically mentioned his innovative approach to tactical aviation safety. Alina received a letter of commendation that went into her personnel file, where no one would ever read it. Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, 1994. The test facility at Eglin was conducting live fire exercises, and Alina had been brought in to evaluate the effectiveness of new countermeasure systems. She'd spent 2 weeks analyzing data, running simulations, and identifying a critical flaw in the deployment sequence that could leave aircraft vulnerable during the 3-second window between detection and response. She wrote up her findings and submitted them to Major General Raymond Pritchard, who was overseeing the program. 2 days later, she was called to his office. "Colonel Martinez, I've reviewed your report." Pritchard tapped the document with one finger. "The findings are concerning, but I'm wondering if perhaps you're being overly cautious. The system performed well in all our tests." "It performed well in controlled tests, sir," Alina clarified. "But in combat conditions, with multiple targets and electronic warfare interference, that 3-second gap becomes critical. An enemy with sophisticated systems could exploit it." "Could," Pritchard emphasized. "Not would, not definitely could." Alina pulled out additional data. "Sir, if you look at the Gulf War encounters." "The Gulf War is over, Colonel. We're designing systems for future conflicts." Pritchard's tone was patient but dismissive, the way someone might speak to a child who didn't understand adult complexities. "I appreciate your thoroughness, but I think you're overthinking this. The engineers who designed this system have decades of experience." "So do I, sir. In testing protocols and safety analysis, yes, but this is weapons systems design. It's a different specialty." Pritchard smiled, trying to soften the blow. "Look, your caution is noted. I'll have the team review your concerns, but I don't think we need to delay deployment over a theoretical vulnerability." Alina left his office knowing her report would be filed and forgotten. She was right. She knew she was right, but no one wanted to hear it from a woman, especially when it meant admitting the system wasn't perfect. 3 years later, during exercises in Kosovo, an aircraft using that countermeasure system took a hit during the exact 3-second window Alina had identified. The pilot ejected safely, but the aircraft was lost. The after-action report noted a previously unidentified vulnerability in the deployment sequence. Alina read the report and said nothing. What was there to say? Arlington, Virginia, September 12, 2001. Alina sat in her apartment, watching the news coverage of the Pentagon, where she'd been supposed to attend a meeting the day before. The meeting had been rescheduled at the last minute, a stroke of luck that felt obscene when so many others hadn't been lucky. The phone rang. It was Pritchard, now a lieutenant general. "Martinez, we need you in D.C. tomorrow. We're forming a task force to develop new reconnaissance capabilities, unmanned systems. The president wants options on his desk within a month. Alina didn't hesitate. I'll be there. She spent the next 2 years barely sleeping, designing drone protocols that would provide real-time intelligence while minimizing American casualties. The work was technically challenging and emotionally grueling. Every decision she made could mean the difference between a successful mission and a catastrophe. She developed a reconnaissance system that used overlapping coverage patterns and predictive algorithms to identify threats before they became critical. The system was elegant, efficient, and revolutionary. When it was time to present the program to Congress, General Pritchard stood at the podium. This new system represents a fundamental shift in how we approach aerial reconnaissance, he said, using Alina's exact phrasing from her technical brief. By implementing predictive threat assessment and multi-layered coverage protocols, we can provide battlefield commanders with unprecedented situational awareness. Alina sat in the back row, wearing her dress uniform, watching him describe her work using her words. Around her, Pentagon officials nodded approvingly. Senators asked questions that Pritchard answered by paraphrasing her reports. Major Sarah Chen, sitting beside her, leaned over and whispered, "This is bullshit. He's literally reading your analysis verbatim." "The system works," Alina replied quietly. "That's what matters." "Does it matter, I mean?" Sarah's voice was tight with anger. "You pour your life into this work and some general who couldn't design a paper airplane takes credit. How is that fair?" It wasn't fair. Alina knew it wasn't fair, but fairness had never been part of the equation. "It matters because the system will save lives," Alina said. "Marines in Fallujah will have better intelligence. Soldiers in Afghanistan won't walk into ambushes. That matters more than my ego." But that night, alone in her apartment, she threw a glass against the wall. Not to break it, though it did break, but to hear something shatter, to release the scream that had been building in her chest for months. Then she cleaned up the glass, picking up every shard carefully, methodically, the way she approached everything in her life. The next morning, she went back to work. The Pentagon, 2003. The Legion of Merit ceremony was held in a small conference room. 12 people attended, mostly colleagues who were required to be there, a few friends who'd made the effort. There was no press, no public recognition, no family. Alina's parents were both dead by then, and she had no partner to stand beside her. The citation was read in a monotone by a colonel she'd never met, for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services and achievements, sustained superior performance, devotion to duty. Generic language that could apply to anyone, that revealed nothing about what she'd actually accomplished. The medal was pinned to her uniform. Everyone clapped politely. There was weak coffee and stale cookies. Alina looked down at the Legion of Merit, the military's highest peacetime service medal, and felt nothing. Not pride, not satisfaction, just emptiness. This was supposed to be the culmination of a career, recognition of excellence, proof that she'd succeeded. Instead, it felt like a consolation prize, a pat on the head, a way of saying thanks for playing before shuffling her off to retirement. That night, she put the Legion of Merit in her desk drawer with her Distinguished Flying Cross and Miguel's Purple Heart. 3 medals, representing 3 different kinds of sacrifice. She looked at them for a long moment, then closed the drawer. She had 7 more years until mandatory retirement. 7 more years to make a difference, to do work that mattered, to fulfill the promise she'd made to Miguel on a roof in El Paso. She didn't know that the most important fight of her life was still ahead. She didn't know that sometimes the most invisible people carry the most dangerous truths. But she was about to find out. Alina walked through the doors of Building 4 at Johnson Space Center feeling something she hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement. At 52, she was starting over, and it felt like coming home. The space station processing facility was massive, a clean room where components of the International Space Station were tested and integrated before launch. Through the windows, she could see the mock-up of the ISS modules, gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Dr. Martinez, a woman in her 30s, approached, hand extended. "I'm Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. I'll be showing you around today." Sarah was brilliant, MIT graduate, 2 PhDs, and an infectious enthusiasm for the work. As they toured the facility, she explained the current projects: life support systems for extended missions, radiation shielding improvements, atmospheric recycling protocols. "This is where you'll be working primarily," Sarah said, leading Alina into a lab filled with prototypes and testing equipment. "Your military experience with closed-system life support is exactly what we need. We're planning missions to Mars eventually, which means years in space, not months. Everything has to be perfect." "Perfect is impossible," Alina said, running her hand along a filtration prototype. "But we can get close." "That's what I like to hear," Sarah grinned. "Welcome to NASA, Dr. Martinez. We're lucky to have you." For the first time in years, Alina felt seen. Not as a diversity hire, not as a token, but as an expert whose knowledge was valued. She should have known it was too good to last. NASA Johnson Space Center, 2007, late night 3 years later. The lab was empty except for Alina, who sat hunched over her computer screen, eyes burning from hours of data analysis. It was 11 p.m. on a Thursday, and she'd been at work since 6 a.m. Something was wrong with the latest batch of air filtration systems from Thornton Aerospace. The stress test results didn't match the specifications, subtle differences that most people would miss, but Alina's trained eye caught them immediately. She pulled up the materials analysis. The aluminum alloy wasn't quite right. The density was off by 0.3%, a tiny difference, but in space, tiny differences killed people. Her phone rang. It was her supervisor, Richard Pemberton, calling from home. "Alina, it's late. Go home." "Richard, I found something. The Thornton components, they're not meeting spec." A pause. "What do you mean?" "The air filtration housings. The alloy composition is wrong. They're using a cheaper aluminum blend, probably saving 50 cents per unit, but it compromises structural integrity under prolonged stress." "Are you sure?" Alina looked at her data, 23 samples all showing the same deviation. "I'm sure." "Okay," Richard's voice was careful. "Document everything. We'll look at it first thing Monday." But Monday came, and Richard told her to hold off. "Let me run this up the chain quietly. Thornton's our primary contractor. We need to be absolutely certain before we make accusations." Tuesday, he told her the procurement office was looking into it. Wednesday, she was told her concerns were noted, but not currently actionable. By Friday, Alina realized no one was going to do anything. NASA Johnson Space Center, 2008, the meeting. Alina sat across from Dr. Marcus Webb, the director of procurement, in his corner office with a view of Clear Lake. Her evidence was spread across his desk: materials analysis, stress test results, projections showing when and how the systems would fail. "Dr. Martinez," Webb said, not looking at the data, "I appreciate your diligence, but you have to understand the bigger picture here." "The bigger picture is that astronauts could die," Alina said. "The bigger picture is that Thornton Aerospace employs 15,000 people. They've been NASA's partner for 30 years. They're politically connected at the highest levels." Webb finally looked at her. "If we make accusations without ironclad proof—" "This is ironclad proof," Alina interrupted, pointing at her charts. "It's data that suggests a potential issue," Webb corrected. "But there are other interpretations. Maybe the alloy variation is within acceptable tolerances. Maybe your projections are too conservative. Maybe." Maybe you're scared, Alina said quietly. Scared of Richard Thornton, III, and his lawyers and his congressional friends. Webb's expression hardened. That's out of line, Doctor. You know what's out of line? Letting substandard components go into systems that keep people alive in space. Alina stood, gathering her papers. I'm filing a formal report with the Inspector General. That's your right, Webb said coldly. But I should warn you, whistleblower complaints have a way of making people's careers complicated. Alina met his eyes. My career has always been complicated. She filed the report the next day. It was logged, stamped, and sent to the Inspector General's office with a notation that it would be reviewed in due course. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Nothing happened. But other things did. NASA Johnson Space Center, 2009, the isolation. It started subtly. Alina would arrive at meetings to find they'd been rescheduled without anyone telling her. Her security clearance for certain databases was revoked. Routine administrative review. Her latest research paper was rejected from the Journal of Aerospace Engineering with a terse note about insufficient peer review. Colleagues who'd been friendly started avoiding her in the hallways. Coffee invitations dried up. She ate lunch alone in her car, reading technical manuals. Sarah Okonkwo was one of the few who remained loyal. Over coffee one afternoon, away from NASA, at a diner in Webster, Sarah spoke bluntly. Alina, people are scared. Word got around about your Thornton complaint. Management's putting pressure on anyone associated with you. I'm not asking anyone to support me publicly, Alina said. I'm just asking them not to pretend I don't exist. I know, but that's how it works. They isolate you, make you toxic, wait for you to give up or leave. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing Alina's hand. Don't give up, please, because if you're right about this, and I think you are, you're the only one with the guts to see it through. But guts didn't pay the bills. Alina had sunk thousands into hearing a whistleblower attorney, copying documents, pursuing her complaint through official channels. Her savings were evaporating. She started skipping meals, walking to work to save gas, buying clothes at thrift stores, which didn't matter until the day she overheard 2 junior engineers laughing about that weird old lady who dresses like she's homeless. She was 57 years old. She'd served her country for 40 years, and she was being pushed out for telling the truth. El Paso, Texas, 2012, the funeral. Alina's mother died on a Tuesday in March. Heart failure, sudden but not entirely unexpected at 88. Alina flew to El Paso on her credit card. She didn't have cash for the ticket and spent 3 days sorting through a lifetime of memories. The house still smelled like her mother's cooking, even though no one had cooked there in months. Alina found boxes of photographs. Miguel in his dress uniform, her parents' wedding, Alina's high school graduation. In her mother's bedroom closet, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, she found Miguel's purple heart on a silver chain. Her mother had worn it for years after the funeral, keeping Miguel close to her heart. Alina sat on the bed, holding the medal, and wept for the first time in months. For Miguel, who'd believed in her. For her mother, who'd cleaned toilets so her daughter could dream. For her father, long dead, whose skepticism had been a kind of protection against disappointment. For herself, who'd sacrificed everything: marriage, children, financial security, peace, for a career that was destroying her from the inside. I don't know if I can keep going, Mama, she whispered to the empty room. I'm so tired. But then she remembered something her mother had said years ago, when Alina was considering dropping out of college after Miguel died. Your brother didn't die so you could give up, Mija. He died believing you would do something important. Don't make his death meaningless. Alina packed Miguel's purple heart carefully in her suitcase. She couldn't give up. Not while astronauts were at risk, not while the truth was being buried, not while she still had breath in her body. She flew back to Houston and returned to the fight. NASA Johnson Space Center, 2015, the end. Alina, we need to talk about your future here. Pemberton's office. The same office where, 8 years ago, he'd first told her about the Thornton problems and promised to help. Now his face was carefully neutral, the way HR executives looked when they were about to fire someone. Let me guess, Alina said tiredly, more restructuring. We're offering you early retirement, full pension, benefits continuation, a very generous severance package. He slid a folder across the desk. You've had an incredible career, Alina. 36 years of service between the military and NASA. You deserve to rest. I deserve to finish my work, Alina corrected. I deserve to see Thornton Aerospace held accountable. Pemberton sighed. Alina, that ship has sailed. The IG closed your complaint last year, insufficient evidence to proceed. Thornton's been cleared, it's over. It's not over. The components are still substandard. The risk is still. The components meet minimum specifications, Pemberton interrupted. Are they perfect? No, but they're acceptable, and that's all that matters legally. People could die, Alina said, her voice breaking slightly. People could die crossing the street, Pemberton replied, not unkindly. We calculate acceptable risk. That's what engineering is, managing risk, not eliminating it. Alina looked at the retirement papers. She was 63, tired, broke, fighting a battle everyone told her she couldn't win. And if I don't sign, then we'll initiate termination proceedings, poor performance reviews which we've been documenting, insubordination, failure to work collaboratively with team members. Pemberton's expression was sympathetic but firm. You'll leave with nothing, no severance, and your pension could be affected. Is that really what you want? It wasn't what she wanted, but signing felt like surrender, like betraying Miguel, her mother, everyone who'd believed in her. Can I have 24 hours? She asked. Of course. That night, Alina sat in her apartment, the retirement papers on her kitchen table beside Miguel's Purple Heart. She was out of options, out of money, out of allies. But not out of fight. She signed the papers, she took the severance, she let them push her out. And then, quietly, methodically, she began planning her next move. If NASA wouldn't listen, she'd find someone who would. Even if it took everything she had left. Even if it killed her trying. Alina's apartment had transformed into something that would alarm a fire marshal. Every wall was covered with printouts, photographs, spreadsheets. Red string connected documents across her living room like a spider's web, mapping the connections between Thornton Aerospace executives, NASA contracts, and suspicious quality control reports. She'd spent her entire severance package, $47,000, on legal fees, document requests, and copies. Her lawyer, a earnest young woman named Patricia Hernandez who specialized in whistleblower cases, had warned her this could take years. Dr. Martinez, I need to be honest with you, Patricia had said during their first meeting. Richard Thornton III has an army of lawyers. He sued journalists, competitors, former employees. And he wins. Not always because he's right, but because he can afford to fight longer than anyone else. I don't need to win in court, Alina had replied. I just need someone to investigate. Congress, the FBI, the GAO, someone with subpoena power. That had been 3 months ago. Since then, Alina had filed 17 Freedom of Information Act requests, written to 32 congressional offices, and contacted 9 different investigative journalists. The FOIA requests came back heavily redacted, black bars obscuring anything useful. The congressional offices sent form letters, and the journalists. Her phone rang. It was Marcus Chen from ProPublica, the third reporter she'd contacted. Dr. Martinez, I've been looking into your allegations. The data is compelling, but I need to be straight with you. My editor won't touch this story. Alina's heart sank. Why not? Legal exposure. Thornton sued the Washington Post 3 years ago over a story about labor violations. The case got thrown out, but it cost the Post hundreds of thousands in legal fees. My editor doesn't want to risk it without a smoking gun, something absolutely undeniable. I have materials analysis showing. You have data from a disgruntled former employee, Marcus interrupted gently. That's how Thornton's lawyers will frame it. I'm sorry. If you get congressional hearings or if the IG reopens the investigation, call me. But until then, my hands are tied. Elena hung up and stared at her wall of evidence. Somewhere in this maze was the smoking gun. She just had to find it. Houston Public Library, 2016, Digital Archive Room. Elena couldn't afford home internet anymore, so she spent her days at the library, using the public computers to dig through corporate databases, SEC filings, and government procurement records. The librarians knew her by name now, the elderly woman who arrived when the doors opened and left when they closed, printing documents and taking meticulous notes. One afternoon, buried deep in a supplemental filing to Thornton Aerospace's quarterly report, Elena found something, a line item for quality assurance restructuring that coincided with a major contract renewal with NASA. She cross-referenced it with employee records, publicly available data from LinkedIn and industry publications. Thornton had laid off 3 senior quality control inspectors in 2006, the same year they'd reduced their materials costs by 18%. Elena's hands shook as she printed the documents. This was a pattern, not a single instance of fraud but a systematic business model. Fire the people who ensured quality, use cheaper materials, pocket the difference, and hope no one noticed. She mapped out every major NASA contract Thornton had received since 2006. Then she mapped their personnel changes, their materials expenditures, their profit margins. The correlation was undeniable. Every time Thornton increased profits, it was preceded by quality control reductions. Elena printed everything, 47 pages of analysis. The librarian, a kind woman named Rose who'd started bringing Elena snacks, looked concerned. "Honey, you doing okay? You've been working so hard on this, whatever it is." "I'm trying to save lives," Elena said simply. Rose studied her, really looked at her, the way so few people did anymore. The worn clothes, the tired eyes, the determination that bordered on obsession. "I believe you," Rose said quietly. And something about that simple statement made Elena's eyes burn with unshed tears. Someone believed her, even if it was just a librarian who didn't understand aerospace engineering. Someone believed her. Houston, Texas, 2017, the breaking point. Elena had lost 15 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. Her apartment was sweltering because she'd turned off the AC to save money. She ate peanut butter sandwiches twice a day and told herself it was efficient, not desperate. Her brother's widow, Carmen, called every week, begging her to come to El Paso. "We have a spare room, Elena, please. You can't live like this." "I'm fine," Elena lied, looking at her empty refrigerator. "You're not fine. Everyone can see you're not fine." Carmen's voice cracked. "Miguel wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want you destroying yourself." "Miguel died trusting his government to protect him," Elena said. "If I give up now, if I let this go, then what was his death for? What was any of it for?" She hung up before Carmen could argue further. That afternoon, Elena walked to the food bank, 3 miles in Houston's summer heat. She stood in line with single mothers and homeless veterans, waiting for her weekly ration of canned goods and day-old bread. A woman behind her, maybe 30 years old, recognized her. "Dr. Martinez, I took your safety systems seminar at the Space Center 5 years ago. You're brilliant. What are you doing here?" Elena wanted to lie, to make up some story about volunteering, but she was too tired. "I'm here because I ran out of money fighting people who don't want the truth told," she said simply. "But I'd make the same choice again." The young woman looked stricken. Is there anything I can do? Anyone I can contact? Do you know any congresspeople? Alina asked, half joking. Actually, my cousin is an aide to Senator Harrison. Patricia Harrison, she chairs the space subcommittee. I could ask him to look at your case. Alina's heart stuttered. Your cousin works for Senator Harrison. Yeah, James Norton. He's former Army, served in Afghanistan. He's a good guy, really believes in doing the right thing. The woman pulled out her phone. Can I give him your number? Yes, Alina said immediately. Yes, please. She walked home with her food bank groceries, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Houston, Texas, 2017 first contact. James Norton called 2 weeks later. Alina had begun to think the woman at the food bank had been humoring her, that nothing would come of it. Dr. Martinez, this is James Norton, Senior Policy Advisor to Senator Harrison. I received your contact information from my cousin, and I've been reviewing some of your public filings. I'd like to hear more about your allegations against Thornton Aerospace. Alina's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the phone. You want to hear more? Yes, ma'am. I flew in Blackhawks in Afghanistan. Life support systems, communications equipment, all of it had to work perfectly or we died. I know what it means when contractors cut corners. His voice was serious, respectful. If you have evidence that Thornton is endangering astronauts, the senator needs to know. Alina closed her eyes, fighting tears. Mr. Norton, I have so much evidence. I have materials analysis, financial records, patterns of behavior going back years. I've been trying to get someone, anyone, to listen for so long. I'm listening now, James said. Send me everything you have. I can't promise anything, but I'll review it personally. And if it's as serious as you say, I'll get it in front of the senator. That night, Alina organized every document, every spreadsheet, every piece of evidence she'd collected. She wrote a comprehensive summary, 20 pages outlining the scope of the fraud, the specific risks, the projected failure timelines. She couldn't afford to print it all, so she went back to the library and used her allotted printing time. It took 3 days to print everything. She saved the files on a flash drive as backup. The package went out priority mail, $47 of her remaining $200 in the bank. She tracked it obsessively, watching as it made its way from Houston to Washington, D.C. When the confirmation came that James had received it, Alina allowed herself to hope. Maybe this time, someone would listen. Houston, Texas, 2018, the waiting. Months passed. James would call occasionally with questions, asking her to clarify technical points or provide additional documentation. Each time, Alina answered thoroughly, sending whatever he needed. The senator is taking this seriously, James assured her in March. But building a case against someone like Thornton takes time. We need everything airtight before we go public. Alina understood, but the waiting was agonizing. Every news report about the ISS made her anxious. Commander Jessica Wu was up there again, on her second long-duration mission. 6 months in space, trusting systems that Alina knew were compromised. She'd sent a message through back channels, trying to warn Wu privately. The message came back, unable to deliver. Security protocols prohibit unsolicited communications with active crew members. Alina lay awake at night, calculating how long the filtration systems would hold. Her projections said they should be fine for standard 6-month missions. But if anything went wrong, if the mission extended, if usage was higher than expected, if any of a dozen variables shifted, the systems could fail catastrophically. In October, James called with news. Dr. Martinez, the senator, wants to meet with you, in person. She's cleared her schedule for January 5th. I know that's far out, but it's the soonest we could arrange given congressional recess and the holiday schedule. Can you make it to D.C.? Yes, Alina said immediately, though she had no idea how she'd afford the ticket. Yes, absolutely. She hung up and looked at her bank account. $847. A flight to D.C. would cost at least $300. A hotel, even a cheap one, would be another $100. Food, transportation. She'd make it work. She'd sell everything she owned if she had to. This was her last chance. Her final shot at making someone listen, at keeping her promise to Miguel, at ensuring that Commander Wu and every other astronaut came home safely. Elena pulled out Miguel's purple heart and held it in her palm, feeling its weight. "I'm going to finish this," she whispered. "One way or another, I'm going to finish this." She didn't know that in 2 months, she'd walk into the Capitol building and face the most humiliating moment of her crusade. She didn't know that her worn blazer and crinkled folder would almost cost her everything. But she also didn't know that sometimes the lowest moment comes right before the breakthrough. Sometimes you have to be completely dismissed before someone finally sees you. And sometimes a simple bracelet carrying proof of who you've been is enough to change everything. Alina stood in her apartment, methodically sorting her possessions into 3 piles: keep, sell, donate. The keep pile was small: Miguel's purple heart, her own medals, a handful of photographs, essential documents. Everything else was negotiable. She listed her furniture on Craigslist. Her television, barely used, went for $80. A bookshelf, $30. Her mother's china set, which she'd kept out of sentimentality rather than use, sold for $150 to a young couple furnishing their first apartment. "Are you sure?" the woman asked, carefully wrapping a plate. "These look like family heirlooms." "They are," Alina said. "But my family would rather I use them to do something important than keep them gathering dust." Each sale brought her closer to the $500 she estimated she'd need for the trip. By mid-December, she had $623, enough for a plane ticket, one night in a cheap motel, and maybe 2 meals. She bought the ticket on December 18th. Houston to Reagan National, departing January 4th, returning January 6th. The cheapest flight, with a layover in Dallas and a middle seat both ways. It cost $347. That left $276 for everything else. Houston, Texas, late December 2018. Alina practiced her presentation every night, standing in her near-empty apartment, speaking to chairs she'd arranged to represent Senator Harrison and her staff. She'd condensed years of research into a 30-minute presentation, with additional materials ready for any question they could ask. The critical failure point occurs at approximately 8.5 months of continuous operation, she told the empty chairs. Based on the alloy composition and stress test data, the filtration housings will develop microfractures that compromise structural integrity. In a vacuum environment with pressure differentials, these fractures propagate rapidly, leading to catastrophic failure. She ran through the presentation 17 times, timing herself, adjusting her wording, anticipating objections. On Christmas Day, she ate ramen noodles and continued working. Carmen called, begging her to come to El Paso for the holiday. "I can't, Carmen, I need to prepare." "Alina, it's Christmas, you shouldn't be alone." But Alina wasn't alone. She had her evidence, her mission, her brother's memory keeping her company. That was enough. On December 28th, she received an email from James Norton with the meeting logistics. 2 p.m., January 5th, Senator Harrison's office in the Hart Senate Office Building. James would meet her in the lobby at 1:45 p.m. "Please bring all original documentation," James wrote. "The senator wants to see your source materials." Alina looked at her printer, broken for 6 months, too expensive to replace. She'd have to print everything at the library. She calculated 127 pages of core evidence plus supporting documents. That would cost $38.10 in printing fees at 10 cents per page. She had $276, minus $38.10 for printing. $80 for the motel she'd booked near the Capitol, $20 for metro fare, $30 for food. She'd have about $100 left for emergencies. It would be tight, but doable. Houston Public Library, January 2, 2019. Alina spent 6 hours at the library, printing her evidence packet. Rose, the librarian, noticed her feeding dollar bills into the printer over and over. "Big project?" Rose asked. "The biggest of my life," Alina replied. When the printing was done, Alina carefully organized the pages, checking every single one to ensure they were in order, that nothing was missing. She didn't have money for a professional binder, so she used paper clips, 3 of them, spaced evenly to keep the pages together. She found a manila folder in the library's free supplies bin, slightly crinkled at the corners but functional. It would have to do. Rose watched her work with concern. "Alina, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Is this about the space stuff, the thing you've been working on all year?" Alina nodded. "And you're going to Washington to present it?" "Yes, I have a meeting with a senator on Saturday." Rose was quiet for a moment. "I don't understand all that engineering stuff, but I've watched you work. I've seen how hard you've pushed yourself. Whatever happens in that meeting, know that you've already done something important. You haven't given up. That matters." Alina felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Rose. That means more than you know." She left the library with her manila folder, her evidence carefully organized inside. Tomorrow, she'd fly to Washington. Tomorrow, everything would change. She hoped. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, January 4, 2019, layover. Alina's first flight was delayed, making her layover shorter than planned. She'd brought a peanut butter sandwich from home. She couldn't afford airport food, and ate it quickly while watching departure boards. The sandwich was stale, the jelly had soaked through the bread, but it was fuel, nothing more. A businessman nearby wrinkled his nose. "Jesus, lady, couldn't you eat that somewhere else? Some of us have to smell that." Alina wrapped up the remains of her sandwich and said nothing. She'd learned long ago that some people would always find reasons to be dismissive. Her connecting flight boarded late. She squeezed into her middle seat, manila folder on her lap, between a teenager who immediately put in earbuds and a businessman who spread out as if the armrests belonged exclusively to him. Alina made herself small, folder clutched against her chest, and tried not to think about how much was riding on the next 48 hours. The plane hit turbulence over Tennessee. The businessman grabbed the armrest, knuckles white. "It's just convection currents from the mountain ranges," Alina said quietly. "Nothing to worry about." He looked at her like she'd spoken in tongues. "What?" "The turbulence. It's normal over the Appalachians. The plane can handle much worse." He stared at her for a moment. This elderly woman in a worn blazer who apparently knew about aviation, then turned away without responding. Alina closed her eyes and tried to rest. She'd need all her energy for tomorrow. Arlington, Virginia, January 4, 2019, evening. The motel was called the Starlight Inn, which was generous. It was a 2-story building on a busy road, with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. But it was $79 per night, the cheapest Alina could find within metro distance of the Capitol, and it had a bed. She checked in using her credit card, which she'd sworn not to use again but had no choice. The clerk barely looked at her, just handed over a key card and pointed to the stairs. Room 217 smelled like cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The bedspread had stains Alina tried not to examine too closely. The bathroom mirror was cracked. The TV remote was missing. Alina sat on the bed and pulled out her presentation notes one more time. She'd reviewed them on the plane, but she needed to review them again. And again. Until every word, every statistic, every projection was burned into her memory. Around 9 p.m., She allowed herself to call Carmen. "I'm here," Alina said. "In D.C. the meeting is tomorrow." "Oh, Alina," Carmen's voice was thick with emotion. "I've been praying for you, we all have." "Thank you. Do you have everything you need? Are you comfortable?" Alina looked around the dingy motel room. "I'm fine. I have what I need." "Call me after the meeting. No matter what happens, call me. Promise." "I promise." After hanging up, Alina laid out her clothes for tomorrow. The same blazer she'd worn to her mother's funeral, pressed as well as she could manage with the motel's iron. Her sensible shoes, polished with a washcloth. A simple blouse, also from her mother's funeral. And the bracelet. She'd bought it last week, her final purchase before the trip, $20 at a craft store, for a thin silver chain and a tiny mounting clasp. She'd taken her distinguished flying cross to a jeweler who'd created a miniature replica, small enough to wear on a bracelet. "This is beautiful work," the jeweler had said, examining the original metal. "You earned this." 1987, Alina had confirmed. Test pilot, Edwards Air Force Base. The jeweler had looked at her with new respect. "Ma'am, I won't charge you for the mounting. Any woman who earned this medal, well, it's an honor to do the work." Now Alina held the bracelet, the miniature distinguished flying cross catching the harsh motel light. She'd never worn her medals outside official ceremonies. They felt too much like boasting, like demanding recognition she'd been taught not to expect. But tomorrow, walking into that building, she might need proof of who she'd been. She might need visible evidence that she was someone worth listening to. She put the bracelet on her wrist, feeling its unfamiliar weight. "Okay, Miguel," she whispered to the empty room. "This is it. Everything we've worked for, everything you died believing I could do, it comes down to tomorrow." She turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to traffic on the highway, going over her presentation one more time in her mind. At some point, exhaustion finally claimed her. But her dreams were full of spacecraft breaking apart, of astronauts calling for help no one could provide, of her brother's face asking why she'd waited so long. She woke at 5 a.m., heart pounding, and knew sleep was finished. Tomorrow today had arrived. It was time to keep her promise. Or die trying. Senator Patricia Harrison's private office was nothing like Alina had imagined. She'd expected something imposing, leather chairs, American flags, the trappings of power. Instead, it felt more like a working war room. The walls were covered with maps, charts, budget breakdowns. A whiteboard showed upcoming legislation with notes in different colored markers. Harrison herself was 53, sharp-eyed, with gray streaking through her dark hair that she made no effort to hide. She gestured Alina toward a conference table by the window. "Dr. Martinez, I apologize again for what happened at reception. It's inexcusable." Harrison's voice was firm, sincere. "And I want you to know, I've reviewed the preliminary materials James sent me. What you've uncovered is deeply disturbing." Alina set her manila folder on the table, her hands steadier now. "Senator, thank you for seeing me. I know Thornton Aerospace is powerful. I know this could be politically difficult." "Let me stop you there." Harrison leaned forward. "I don't care if Richard Thornton III has the president on speed dial. If he's defrauding taxpayers and endangering astronauts, he's going down. That's not politics. That's my job." Margaret Chen entered with coffee, actual coffee in real mugs, not styrofoam. James Norton followed, carrying a tablet and legal pad. "Walk us through it," Harrison said. "Start from the beginning." Alina opened her folder and began. She explained the initial discovery, the stress fractures in the air filtration systems that didn't match specifications. She showed the materials analysis proving Thornton had substituted cheaper alloys. She presented financial records showing a pattern. Every profit increase coincided with quality control reductions. "Here," Alina said, laying out a timeline. 2006, Thornton fires 3 senior QC inspectors. Same year, materials costs drop 18%. 2008, they eliminate independent testing protocols. Profit margin increases by 4.2%. 2011, they offshore manufacturing of critical components. Another profit spike. Harrison studied the documents, her expression growing darker. And NASA didn't catch this. Some people caught it, Alina said quietly. I caught it. I filed reports with my supervisors, with procurement, with the inspector general. But Thornton has friends everywhere. People who owed them favors, people who were afraid of their lawyers, people who valued institutional relationships over safety. So they silenced you, James said, his voice tight with anger. They tried to. Alina pulled out more documents. But I kept digging. I found patterns in their subcontracting. They use shell companies to obscure the actual manufacturing sources. I found quality control reports that were falsified. I found internal emails discussing acceptable risk thresholds that prioritize cost savings over safety margins. How did you get internal emails? Margaret asked. I didn't, but Thornton is publicly traded, and certain communications are required in SEC filings. Most people don't know how to read between the lines of financial disclosures. I do. Alina allowed herself a small smile. 36 years of military and aerospace experience teaches you where companies hide problems. For 2 hours, Alina walked them through her evidence. Harrison asked sharp questions. James took meticulous notes. Margaret cross-referenced everything against other investigations. Finally, Harrison sat back. Dr. Martinez, do you understand what you're handing us? This isn't just contract fraud. This is a potential criminal conspiracy. If we pursue this, Thornton will come after you with everything they have. They'll dig into your life, attack your credibility, try to destroy you financially and professionally. They've already destroyed me financially and professionally, Alina said simply. I have nothing left to lose. But Commander Jessica Wu has 2 daughters who deserve to have their mother come home safely. Every astronaut up there deserves to know their equipment won't fail them. That's worth more than my comfort. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then, James, I want subpoenas drafted by Monday. We're opening a formal congressional investigation. Margaret, coordinate with the GAO and the IG's office. I want independent audits of every Thornton contract from the past decade. And get the FBI involved. If there's criminal activity here, I want prosecutions. She turned back to Alina. Dr. Martinez, I'm going to need you to testify publicly before the committee. Are you prepared for that? Alina thought of the receptionist's scorn, the years of being dismissed and ignored, the humiliation of standing in line at food banks while men who'd stolen her work received medals. Yes, she said, I'm prepared. Harrison extended her hand. Then let's take these bastards down. Capitol Hill, January 6, 2019 morning. Alina woke in her dingy motel room feeling something she hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with purpose. Her phone showed 6 missed calls, 3 from Carmen, 2 from Sarah Okonkwo at NASA, 1 from Patricia Hernandez, her attorney. She called Patricia first. Alina, I just heard from Senator Harrison's office. They're opening an investigation. Patricia's voice was jubilant. This is huge. This is everything we've been fighting for. It's not over yet, Alina cautioned, but she couldn't help smiling. No, but it's the beginning of the end. Thornton's lawyers are going to fight hard, but with congressional backing, you're protected. The whistleblower statutes finally apply. Patricia paused. Alina, there might be a substantial monetary reward if this leads to recovered funds. The False Claims Act allows whistleblowers to receive 15 to 30% of recovered amounts. Alina had never thought about money, but the idea of not eating peanut butter sandwiches for every meal, of not selling her mother's china to afford plane tickets. One step at a time, she said. She called Carmen next, who cried with relief, then Sarah, who promised to testify if needed. About time someone listened to you, Sarah said fiercely. Before leaving D.C., Alina did something she'd never done. She walked to the National Air and Space Museum. It was Sunday morning, and the museum was just opening. She stood before the Apollo 11 command module, looking at the scorched heat shield that had protected 3 astronauts on their return from the moon. Someone had built this perfectly. Someone had checked every weld, every seal, every system. Someone had made sure it wouldn't fail. That was the promise, the sacred trust between engineers and the people whose lives depended on their work. Thornton Aerospace had broken that trust, but Alina was going to restore it. Hart Senate Office Building, March 2019, the hearing. The committee room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Journalists filled the press gallery. Alina sat at the witness table, her worn blazer pressed, her bracelet visible on her wrist, her manila folder, now battered from months of use, sitting before her. Across the room, Richard Thornton III sat with 4 lawyers, his expression carefully neutral. Senator Harrison called the hearing to order. Today we examine allegations of systematic fraud in NASA contracting. Our first witness is Dr. Alina Martinez, a decorated Air Force veteran and former NASA engineer who first raised concerns about Thornton Aerospace's practices. Alina was sworn in. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth. She'd been telling the truth for years. Finally, people were listening. She testified for 3 hours. She presented her evidence methodically, answered every question clearly, never wavered under hostile cross-examination from committee members friendly to Thornton. When Senator Mitchell from Texas, whose campaign Thornton had heavily funded, tried to dismiss her as a disgruntled former employee, Harrison cut him off. Senator Mitchell, the witness, is a decorated colonel with 28 years of Air Force service and 15 years at NASA. Her credentials are impeccable. If you want to question her findings, question the data, not her motivations. Alina looked at the miniature Distinguished Flying Cross on her wrist and thought of Miguel, of her mother, of every person who'd believed in her when no one else would. I want to be clear about something, Alina said, her voice steady. I'm not here because I'm angry at Thornton Aerospace or NASA. I'm here because 8 astronauts are currently on the International Space Station, trusting their lives to systems I know are compromised. I'm here because Commander Jessica Wu has 2 little girls who deserve to have their mother come home. I'm here because my brother died believing his government would protect him, and I won't let that trust be betrayed again. The room was silent. I've sacrificed my career, my savings, my reputation to bring this information forward. I've been called crazy, bitter, obsessed. I've eaten at food banks and sold my mother's china to afford this fight. But I'd do it all again, because some promises are too important to break. When Alina finished testifying, the hearing room erupted in applause, unprecedented for a congressional hearing, but the audience couldn't help themselves. Thornton's lawyers looked shaken. Richard Thornton III's neutral expression had cracked. Senator Harrison banged her gavel. We'll adjourn for lunch and resume with testimony from Thornton Aerospace executives at 2 p.m. 6 months later, Houston, Texas. The investigation confirmed everything Alina had documented. Thornton Aerospace was fined $200 million. Criminal charges were filed against 3 executives. Richard Thornton III resigned in disgrace. More importantly, NASA implemented sweeping reforms. Independent quality control audits, whistleblower protections, new oversight protocols. The components on the ISS were replaced during an emergency resupply mission. Commander Wu returned safely to her daughters. Alina's whistleblower reward was $2.3 million, 15% of the recovered funds. She used it to establish the Alina and Miguel Martinez Scholarship Fund for women from working-class families pursuing aerospace engineering. At the first scholarship ceremony, 20 young women received awards. They came from every background: Latina, Black, Asian, white, immigrant, native-born. They had one thing in common: they'd been told they didn't belong, but they refused to believe it. Alina stood before them, wearing a simple dress and her bracelet, the one that had stopped a receptionist cold and changed everything. "My brother Miguel died believing I would do something important," she told them. "My mother cleaned toilets so I could dream of stars. My career was built on sacrifices I didn't always want to make. But here's what I learned: being invisible isn't weakness. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes invisible people are the only ones brave enough to tell the truth." She touched her bracelet. "I wore this to a meeting where I was almost thrown out by security. A receptionist saw an old woman with a crinkled folder and decided I wasn't worth her time. But this bracelet, this proof of who I'd been, changed everything. Not because I needed validation, but because sometimes people need to see evidence of what they're too blind to recognize." Maria Rodriguez, whose mother was a hotel maid, raised her hand. "Dr. Martinez, did it ever get easier? Did they ever stop doubting you?" Elena smiled sadly. "No, but I stopped needing them not to doubt me. I stopped waiting for permission to know my own worth. That's what I want for all of you, not that the world will change, though I hope it does, but that you'll know your value regardless." She paused. "Change the system. Don't just survive it. Be so undeniably excellent that they can't ignore you. But also know, even if they do ignore you, even if they take credit for your work, even if they dismiss you, you're still excellent. Your worth doesn't depend on their recognition." After the ceremony, Alina drove home in a new car, nothing fancy, just a reliable Honda, to an apartment that wasn't falling apart. She could afford heat now and food and the occasional indulgence. But what mattered more was the folder on her desk: applications from next year's scholarship recipients, 43 young women who wanted to reach for the stars. Alina opened the folder and began reading. Each application was a story of determination, sacrifice, dreams that refused to die. Just like hers. She thought of Miguel, whose Purple Heart sat on her desk next to her own medals. She thought of her mother, who'd believed when believing seemed foolish. She thought of every person who dismissed her, doubted her, tried to silence her. And she smiled. Because in the end, they hadn't silenced her. They just made her stronger. The invisible woman had become undeniable. And the promise to the stars, made so many years ago on a roof in El Paso, had finally been kept. The end.